Of all the video game betas and pre-release versions, Super Mario 64's is possibly one of the most fascinating, at least to me. I've always had a passion for this type of stuff, probably because it's something I can never experience, which makes it infinitely mysterious. And what could be more engaging than a mystery that can never be solved? Yes, it is an early version of a game that does exist and that I can play, but I always wonder what the pre-release version could have been like if it came out instead. Whether that's just for the aesthetic differences or even cut content and features. Did you know that this game was originally supposed to have Luigi as a playable character? Well, yeah, you probably did. It's 2022. Supposedly, there was a two-player feature where the second player would play as Luigi. Of course, they never finished it, citing hardware difficulties, but remnants of the feature were discovered in the Giga leak some odd time ago. And a two-player feature was later added by ROM hackers.
I did it all by myself. What?
It was me, Jay. I did it.
Then of course you have the 64DD version of the game, which was never released. But there are debug features that can show some remnants of what it could have looked like. Blarg was also supposed to be in the game, and you can actually spawn him in using GameShark codes. There's also this Yoshi egg sprite that just bounces up and down aimlessly, possibly alluding to a cut feature where you could ride the Yosh. I could talk about the beta of Mario 64 all day, but of all the parts of the beta, I think the art direction is one of the most fascinating. Of course, a lot of the pre-release materials are just crude representations of something that was clearly far from completion. But there is also a far more ethereal and dreamlike quality to the pre-release builds of the game that I find enthralling. I feel like this really leans into the fabled liminal spaces thing, and it should come as no surprise that this has become the topic of many a ROM hack. Of course, there's the famous B3313 hack, which I actually played for last year's marathon. This is easily one of my favorite Mario 64 ROM hacks of all time, on top of being a loose interpretation of the pre-release materials found in archived footage and screenshots. It's also an extremely discomforting experience. This is a really impressive hack just because of how bizarre and ethereal it is. That's my new favorite word. The Preservation Project, on the other hand, isn't trying to be a piece of strange avant-garde psychological horror. This game is far more dedicated to being a precise and authentic recreation of the beta version of the game based on the pre-release materials, chiefly the Space World demo from 1993. The beta elements go far beyond basic aesthetic differences. Mario controls way different than he does in the final version. I'm definitely not used to it, and I would probably say that it's worse. There's a certain stiffness to it that isn't there in the final version of Mario 64. You can't even do a long jump or a backflip, which takes away a lot of options. The side flip doesn't go nearly as high as it does in the final version, and the jump kick isn't there, you kinda just dive. And for a master Mario 64 player like me, it's definitely a disadvantage. If you're familiar with Mario 64's development, this shouldn't be a big surprise. Much of the focus in the beginning was on the movement, and it's entirely likely that Miyamoto and the boys realized that the game lacked a certain fluidity that they could have added later, and eventually did. Of course, even in this state, the game was still far ahead of its time, but without the additional polishes and flourishes that were added in the final version, I don't think the game would have been remembered as fondly as it is now, and it probably would not have had such a profound legacy. The one cool thing about Mario's movement in this version is the ability to launch into a spinny jump from anywhere, which apparently kills enemies on contact, which is pretty badass. There's also this sort of walking, waiting animation that you can do underwater, which is kinda cool, I guess. I mean, clearly I'm not going to die without it because it didn't end up in the final version. A lot of the differences are visual, the most obvious one being the UI. The health bar is now a dial instead of being a pie cut into 8 pieces. And perhaps the coolest part is the map. That's right, if you hit the L button, I think it is, you can actually pull up a map of the current level you're on. And it even comes with a little pointer to show you where you are. Why they removed it, I do not know, but if I had to guess, they probably thought the levels were too complex to be able to sum up into a tiny, low-resolution map in the corner of the screen. The map feature did, however, end up in the DS version where it would take up the lower screen. The game consists of 4 levels, all of which which were shown off at Space World in some capacity in 1995. These levels will be familiar to anybody who has played Super Mario 64, but the art direction is noticeably different. Some areas almost look like they're trying to be a tiny bit more realistic than the final game, at least in terms of texture work. But the individual components don't feel anywhere near as cohesive as they do in the final product. You'll have these stone brick walls with a bit of roughness to them trying to look kinda realistic, right next to a floor made of bright Easter egg looking tiles. It seems like the developers were experimenting with the art direction and figuring out what works best in this new 3D space. Easily, the most unfinished looking area in the game is Cool Mountain, which almost looks like something out of a very early ROMhack. Is that ironic? Or poetic? Probably neither. Obviously, for a game as ambitious and forward-looking as Super Mario 64, it was never going to be perfect on its first try, but I can definitely see the improvements in the final release compared to this. That being said, one thing I actually prefer in the beta is the coins. They look more realistic, and the sound they make also sounds way nicer on the ears. It's way more bassy and gnarly. Speaking of sound, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Mario's voice, which of course is not Charles Martinet yet, but instead the Warner Bros. Sound library, and I think I speak for everyone who's heard it when I say, it's really funny. There's also the original version of Dire Docks. This is a song that I think everybody who's heard it will say is beautiful and amazing and all kinds of wonderful things. So it's crazy to think that it could have sounded like this instead. What's funny about the preservation project is that even though it's not supposed to be deliberately creepy like B3313 was, there is still something about this game that is a little unsettling. Much like the beta recreation of Ocarina of Time was for me, this beta recreation of Mario 64 is naturally discomforting to play. I think what it really comes down to is the fact that I know what Mario 64 is supposed to look like, and this looks almost like that, except everything is just a tiny bit off, just enough for my brain to realize that something isn't right. It's kind of an uncanny valley effect. I know what it's trying to be, but because it's not quite there, it really rubs me the wrong way. There's also this really cramped hallway with 2 doorways, which is an early version of the Boo hallway. This is just weird. It really feels like I'm walking around in some kind of bizarre dream. It's abnormal, but also very fascinating. Beta restoration hacks are some of my favorites, and the people behind this one definitely did their research. If, like me, you're big into this stuff, here you go. This is what it might have been like to play Mario 64 before its release. And now you know. And knowledge is power. Get the power. Nintendo power. Ho ho ho! Thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to tune in to tomorrow's video. And also, have fun watching the Game Awards tonight. Ho 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 ho. Ho ho, that was a joke. Game Awards aren't fun. Now, I won't tell you tomorrow's video topic, but it's worth noting that it's a little bit out of season and would probably have been a great topic 2 months ago. But better late than never, I suppose. Ho ho.